Welcome to Mind Yourself, a podcast sharing real-life stories from real people, alongside conversations about mental health and emotional well-being. Listener discretion is advised, as this episode may include themes some listeners may find distressing. Wherever you're joining us from, whether you're walking, driving, or taking a quiet moment for yourself, you're very welcome here. Let's get started. We welcome Krystle Phelan to the Force One's Mind Yourself podcast. Welcome, Krystle.
Thank you.
You are a psychotherapist and a breathwork practitioner. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist. I qualified back in 2016. I took a bit more of an extended break than I thought I would, so I was into qualification. It was very difficult to get hours at the time. We were planning a house move and babies, so I kind of parked it for a little while, thinking I'd return to it a lot sooner than I did. But it's been 10 years, and I've made the return kind of a couple of weeks ago. So in some ways, it feels like I'm starting over again. In other ways, it's not. So it's a bit of a strange feeling. But actually, the minute I stepped back into a room with a client, it felt like home. It actually felt like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to be doing. So that was a lovely return. And then I suppose what brought me to counselling even was my mother passed away years ago, 20 odd years ago now. And I remember the experience of going to a counsellor and just someone in the room with you, just witnessing your grief, no judgment, compassion. The experience just never left me. And it kind of brought me to eventually decide to do the training. And it was amazing, hard work, but it was the best thing I ever did. And that's what brought me to counselling. And then funny enough, breathwork came along when I was looking for something to connect to the body, not just be up in the head kind of all the time. And that was shortly my dad had died during COVID. So I suppose grief can kind of set you on these little journeys for maybe looking for a bit more meaning or a way to kind of connect with the grief. And that's what led me to breathwork. And I feel like it was a way to let go of some grief that I thought I had articulated and could easily articulate and could talk to anybody about. But there was obviously a piece that was still there that breathwork managed to get to over anything else. So that's what brought me to counselling and breathwork.
Krystle, you're here today to talk about grief.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned there how you lost your mum quite some time ago and your dad sadly died during COVID restrictions. What were the experiences of grief like for you losing your parents? I'd imagine they were two completely different experiences.
Yeah, very different. My mother, I was 21 when she passed away. She was diagnosed with cancer, and it was only maybe 4 months into treatment that she passed away. So it was kind of unexpected. It was very unexpected for me because she had stage 4 cancer, but the family thought it was probably best not to tell me that actually I thought the treatment was to save life, but actually it was just to extend life. And it was only after she passed away I found out. So it was a very difficult grief. 21, you kind of feel like maybe you're an adult, but you still need your parents. You still need that kind of guidance. So for me, it was heavy. It was sad. I have 2 siblings, but there's like an 8 and 9 year age gap between us. So they had married and had their own lives. So it was just me in the house at the time with my mum and dad. So when she passed, it was very difficult. It just changed, like the whole house. The heart of the house had kind of gone. She was like the emotional heart of the home. And for me, I suppose, I think most counsellors might identify kind of, you're generally that bit more empathic, in tune, aware of people's feelings. So she would have been able to kind of identify with me. So when she went, then it was a big hole for me personally. That person was gone. So it was difficult. And it was difficult even when she passed away at home. And it was unexpected. And it was just me and my dad at the time. And it was kind of traumatic. Like she'd been ill, but she'd been in the hospital and she came out and she was supposed to be kind of recovering. but she never really picked up in the days that followed. And I just remember that night, my dad, all I can remember is the middle of the night, all I could hear was his voice. And I never heard his voice that way before or since. And it was just, I think my wife's dying. I went straight into the room and I could tell she was nearly gone. So we had to try and revive her. Like, the two of us tried to actually our best to work on her, and it was kind of a surreal experience. I remember the fire brigade and everything turning up. I remember being 21 thinking, why is the fire brigade here? But obviously they're the first responders, and they tried their best, but she had pretty much gone. So yeah, it was all very traumatic at the time, and there wasn't really anybody to kind of relate to. I think at 21, most of your friends hadn't lost their parents, or really anybody kind of close to them. So it was a very lonely period. It was a very lonely grief. You couldn't really relate to anyone about it. And my dad was obviously dealing with his own grief. And he was a very practical man. Like, he'd show you love in other ways, but not necessarily express it. So it was very hard to relate to each other. And that's the thing when you're grieving, you're always mindful of other people's grief as well. So it's difficult to have that space for yourself. So it was probably a very heavy grief for a while. A long time, probably. I think I probably carried it maybe a bit too much in a way. Kind of, I had this notion that maybe I couldn't be happy or shouldn't be happy because she was gone. And you sort of feel guilty then.
And did losing your mum shift your sense of identity and belonging?
Yeah. Yes, in a way. I think it shifted the whole family sense of identity in a way. Like, she would have been the emotional glue, and not just even in the immediate family, but in terms of extended family. So you kind of found once she'd gone, then the little links to other people or extended families started to kind of slip, or it was harder, or it didn't flow as easily. So you kind of, yeah, as a family, our identity changed completely. And I don't know if people really articulate that or talk about that. It's not just the grief of losing someone, it's how everyone's relationships around them change. Completely change. They don't go back to the way they were. And for me, yeah, I think it shifted my perspective on things too. I kind of wanted to look for something that felt more meaningful. I was working in financial services for years. Wasn't happy. And I think it does, in a way, drive you, though, to kind of look for who you are and what's meaningful to you when you lose somebody. I think when anybody loses someone, you just look for some sort of meaning. And I think that was the first steps. And that's initially what brought me to going down the road to being a counsellor. So kind of grateful, I think. But it changed. Yeah, I was definitely looking for a new identity. And I think I found partially some of it through becoming a counsellor. I definitely think that that's the road it set me on. I wouldn't have done that maybe otherwise if she had been here. I probably would have just stayed in the bank and did what I was supposed to do and not really looked outside of the bubble. But yeah, it definitely shifts your identity.
And then your father died during COVID restrictions. What was especially difficult about grieving during that period?
It was especially stressful. I just remember just the stress of it, because COVID itself, I think particularly if you'd young kids at that age, mine were 8 months and 2.5. And at the time, the very beginning of COVID, they were seen as like the super spreaders. They were like, you know, stay in your bubble, keep the kids away from everyone. So you had the general stress of COVID hanging over you with small children. So that was always, it was just stressful. And then when my dad became ill, he'd been ill at Christmas time. He went into hospital at the beginning of the year, spent about 6 weeks in hospital. They did a load of tests and couldn't get to the bottom of what was wrong with him. But he had an awful pain in his back and he couldn't walk on his legs. And then eventually 6 weeks in Beaumont, and they put him on some sort of steroid, and it was like the Lazarus effect. The next day he was up, walking, back to himself. So they pretty much released him from the hospital a day or two later. and said, we're just going to keep an eye on his bloods and keep him in for appointments. So he'd been down to hospital about a month, and then lockdown hit. So it was stressful because he was still not 100% in himself. And I know he was quite fearful of COVID and getting sick again himself, because he wasn't really 100% recovered. And then as a family, we had the restrictions, so we were mindful of not visiting. We'd be ringing, asking, does he want anything, things like that. But the ease was gone. You couldn't just pop down and see, was he okay? And he was also very independent, so he didn't like you fussing over him either, do you know, that way? So you were kind of half fearful anyway, even when, you know, COVID wasn't there. But it was just particularly stressful. He'd missed a load of hospital appointments because COVID hit. They'd cancelled and basically said it wasn't safe to come in. So he didn't get into the hospital the way he should have. And he became ill at home. And we hadn't been obviously seeing him as much. I'd been talking to him on the phone, but hadn't seen him. And lucky enough, my brother, because they used to work together, just kind of took upon himself. He goes, I'll just go down to him. You stay with the kids. I'll go down and make sure he's okay. So he was kind of keeping an eye on him, thankfully, because he just took a turn and we thought it was just strep throat. And eventually got him into a GP, and the GP wasn't overly happy with him, but sent him home. And I remember my brother saying, yeah, he's not too happy with him. And my husband pushed me to go down and see my dad. I wasn't going to go because I just know the way he is. And then the kids, and I was like, oh, Damien, COVID, the kids, what if we pass something on? Or so just go, Krystle, wear your mask. So I went down on the Tuesday, and he was in the bed, and I remember chatting. He was in great form, funny enough, and having a lovely chat, but sort of knowing as well you weren't supposed to be there, feeling guilty, you weren't technically breaking the law, kind of nearly just going down to see him. He was due to go back to the GP the next day, and he did, and the GP said, if you're not well by Thursday, I want you to ring me. So 2 days later, and my brother gave me a phone call and said, GP said he wants him to go into the hospital, he's not happy. He doesn't seem to have improved. And I went, okay. I said to my husband, he's like, go down. Because my brother said, we're going to have to get an ambulance and send him in. I said, right. So flew down to see him. And he looked the same. But then the ambulance people turned up and took him out of the bed. And I could see the weight had gone off him completely in his legs. He was just half the man. Still in good form and talking and chatting away. And I remember saying to my brother, why does he look like he's dying? And my brother just kind of looked at me shocked. And I think it was that thing, sometimes when you see somebody all the time, you don't necessarily see the changes in them. But I knew something wasn't right. But of course, with COVID, I couldn't go in the ambulance with him. Nobody was allowed in. He was rushed into hospital. You were waiting on phone calls, was the only communication with the hospital. So you can imagine just waiting for phone calls, like waiting at home with 2 small kids as well. Trying to even take a phone call when someone rings is nigh on impossible. But I remember the consultant ringing me and said, Krystle, I don't know how your father is in such good spirits, how he's even talking. He goes, I saw his bloods and I nearly fell off the chair. He goes, it's acute leukemia. I went, okay, well, what does that mean? And he was like, it's serious. He goes, it's critical. Next 48 hours are critical. Okay, can we go in and see him? Is there any way to see him? No, I can't let you in. It's obviously like unprecedented for hospitals at the time as well. So we couldn't get in. We could get the odd phone call through. At that stage, he was half talking, but his voice was going, so you could get the odd phone call. He was admitted 2 days later to ICU. Again, it was phone calls. The hospital might ring. They wouldn't tell you, so it'd just be literally, I think once it was in the middle of bath time with the kids and it was chaos, but you had to take the phone call and see him and try and talk to him. And that was the only communication. And then by the Wednesday, I think I was kind of begging. I was like, can we get in and can somebody come in and see him, please? So they did. They said, look, leave it with us. And they came back to us and said, yeah, we'll allow 2 people in. You as the next of kin and someone else. And I said, there's only me and my 2 brothers. Is there any way you can just let the 3 of us in? No, I'm really sorry, but we can't. So as a family then, like I had to bring that back and be like, they'll only let 2 of us in. So as a family, you're making a decision as to who goes in, kind of knowing it could be the only opportunity with how ill he is. We did make a decision, to be fair, that actually didn't go as badly as I thought. One of my brothers, the one who'd been with him at home, said, look, I got to see him before he went in the hospital, I'll stay, and my other brother can go in. So he went in, the 2 of us, fully kitted out and all the stuff, everybody, full gowns, everything. So it was a different experience. It wasn't just that, pop in the hospital, get your chocolates and 7-Up or something, it was all sterile. It was just put this on, fully covered up, gloves. So if you were holding his hand or anything, you were gloved up. He was just in the ICU. He could barely communicate at that stage, but he was awake and able to register that we were there, which was great. So that was the Wednesday, but I remember the Thursday then, literally just a day later, like we got on a phone, like I rang for the update. I had to ring every morning for an update. And I was told, listen, we had to intubate him during the night, which means he's unconscious. And I kind of knew there was very little chance he might come round from that. And it's hard as a family because I wish they would have told us that before they'd done that, because that was our only link, was through the phone and talking, but obviously he was unconscious then. So that was difficult. And then again, just waiting for updates from consultants, just waiting for the phone to ring. And there was one time, like later that day, lockdown, nowhere to go except the park. Thankfully it was across the road. Still, you're still carrying on with family life, still 2 kids at home, trying to look after a household. Husband still has to work. Life carries on as well in between. No support. There's no one coming out to visit you. There's no one there to support you. Like there was just nobody. You're in the bubble. I brought the kids to the park, 2.5 and 8 months old, kind of sitting on the grass, and it was like the most beautiful weather. Funny enough, that month was just the most beautiful weather. And they'd cut the grass and the 2 of them were playing and they were throwing the grass up in the air. And the giggles, like they were absolutely, like the 2 of them just set each other off. And it was just like, it made me laugh. And then the phone rang and it was the consultant. So I'm obviously having my eye on the kids, but my ear to the phone, and I'm watching them laughing with each other. And then I'm hearing the consultant basically tell me, look, it's not good, Krystle, and listed off all the ways in which my dad's body was failing him, and pretty much said, I don't know if he'll make the next 48 hours. So I had this thing, if anybody looked at us, we were this little happy family and my kids were just laughing away, but actually the reality was I was just listening to somebody on the phone saying your dad's dying, essentially, and knowing I can't get into him, I can't go in and see him, I can't talk to him. And then having to make the phone calls to let my brothers know, the family know. And it was only a day later that the hospital said, look, we'll allow the brother who didn't come in to see him, we'll allow him in for a visit. Obviously he was unconscious, so he didn't know he was there, but he went in anyway. And when he went in, something happened. He could see from his eye, there was blood in his eye, and he'd had a massive brain hemorrhage. And so they rang me while my brother was there, because I'm next to kin. They couldn't tell him first. They had to tell me and say, he's gone, pretty much. You can come in and say your goodbyes. So yeah, it was like, even just that was the drive to the hospital. It was me. I can't bring anyone with me. You're on your own. You're meeting people outside. The brothers were afraid to hug each other. Were afraid to even... Yeah, it was just all so strange. Like you go in, you get kitted up. You're sitting with him in his last moments.
So you have an already traumatic experience, and COVID adds another layer to that trauma, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Do you think that people still carry some unresolved grief from that time?
I think so. I mean, I think if you did experience anything like that, any sort of grief, I don't know, there was the space to really... There was space in a way. Like COVID was funny. It was the double-edged sword of, because you're in the bubble, nothing was happening either. So you could sit with the grief, but it was just, you didn't have the support around you. You didn't really have the space to talk about it, to be consoled, to have the proper funeral arrangements. Like even the funeral was the 10 people. I couldn't have my husband and children in the church. They waited outside. We went home after the funeral, bought a cake in the shop, went home, and then carried on with housework. Like there was none of the rituals were there. Nothing was acknowledged. There was no space for it. Me, I'm used to, and I have the therapist training that I can sit with my feelings and I could process it, but I don't know how anybody else would manage that without support or a space to kind of go. So I think there's a part of you that has to just as well just get on with it and survive and get through it. So I don't know if you necessarily deal with it. And I think that time was just such a strange time even to grieve, because if you've lost somebody, and then when the restrictions were eased up and there was this sense of, oh, we can go back to normal for a bit and you can be reunited with your families. And I was half expecting to see his car pull up sometimes. I actually went, did that actually happen? Was that like a surreal Marvel universe that actually just happened in another timeline? So it was a weird, like the grief would open up again and then you'd shut it down again because you had to just survive. So yeah, it was such a strange time. And even it was his anniversary. He's 5 years gone, and somebody had remarked, 2 people had remarked separately, Asher, it's only 3 years since he's gone. And I looked at them and said, no, it's 5 years. And I realised that probably is the 2 years of COVID that either people have forgotten or just kind of subconsciously said, I will just push that down wherever. So, because it was so surreal. So I definitely think there's definitely has to be unresolved grief, or people are sitting with grief that never got acknowledged or maybe supported during that time.
Krystle, you've touched on something very important there as well in relation to how grief can impact your relationships, particularly with family.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a misconception, isn't there, that grief brings people together to support each other, which is not necessarily true.
No, ultimately it didn't work out that way in our circumstance. It did for a little bit. I suppose it does bring you together to support each other. But I think maybe if there's cracks there beforehand, or, tensions or unresolved dynamics, I think you can sort of put a plaster over for a little while, but then eventually you have to deal with what was there before. And it's a real shame. I suppose for me, I wanted it to bring me and my siblings closer together, because you kind of feel like, it's the only little family we have left. Can we not all come together? And we did for a little while, but then it sort of fell apart. And I think partly because we all deal with grief differently. And for me, I suppose I kind of knew how to deal with it this time. I'm not sure my siblings really, there was a lot of anger there. There was a lot of unprocessed grief, I think. I'm not sure they were ready to look at their own grief. So it's hard to communicate with people when they're coming from a hurt place and maybe you're coming from a different space. So yeah, I think the idealized notion is that, you all come together and that's what families do, but it's not the reality, and it's harder, I think. And it did lead to family estrangement. It led to estrangement between me and my siblings. And in a way, that grief is nearly sometimes harder than my parents. Bereavement is natural in some ways. People die and there's, a natural kind of sympathy, or somebody will acknowledge it. But when you're estranged from your siblings, it kind of brings up like an awkwardness with people, or, you can say, oh no, we're not really speaking. And they can look at you, why? But obviously there's a history to it. It's never just, there's always the straw that broke the camel's back, but there was something before that. So it's very hard to articulate to people the why. You're not going to go into the history of it. But it's just, it adds another layer of grief to the overall situation, I think.
Krystle, you've spoken to us about the loneliness of being a mother yourself without your parents' extended support.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
really tough, I'll be honest. It was really hard. Hard in different ways. There's obviously the emotional side of it. As a mother, you would want your mother's, the emotional support. You want that natural kind of, they know, you kind of want to ask them questions, or, how do we do this? Or was I like this? Or, just those natural kind of things that you want to talk to your mother about, and sort of the sense that your mother will just know what to do with you and come in and help you, and you have that on hand. So when that's not there, and then obviously my dad's gone as well, so he did help in his own way for the time that he was there, and my siblings gone, there's nobody to call. My husband's family are good, but they also have his sister's kids, and they're in their 70s, and you don't want to be putting things on other people. So it can be very isolating. Your world becomes very small. And I think it becomes small even anyway sometimes when you're a mother of young kids, particularly during COVID when you couldn't get out. So there was just a real loneliness to it, and still is. I think for me, I sometimes just find it hard seeing other people and their families together. And it's something I have to be mindful of minding myself in that. Even with my husband's family, as good as they are, there's times I find it difficult. Maybe at Christmas time, the big family gatherings, there is times that are harder than others. So there's a loneliness to it that doesn't really go. You have to learn to just sit with it, accept it, be kind to yourself with it, and just find ways to live with it. Yeah.
After your dad died, Krystle, you found breathwork.
Yeah.
We can often hold grief in our bodies, unprocessed.
Yeah.
Can't we? How did breathwork help you?
I wasn't sure at the time what I was looking for. I tried kind of yoga and things, but it didn't really stick with me. Like fabulous practices, but just for me, it didn't stick. And I'd seen this ad, and it was just locally a lady doing it, and I wasn't really sure what it was about. And I can be a bit skeptical sometimes, but I said, I'll go in and give it a go and see what happens. I remember the first session doing it. I remember finding it really difficult to just sit with your breath, number one, because we don't really do it. We breathe all the time, but we've no awareness of how we're breathing or how difficult it is to actually just stay with the breath. Now, nothing kind of happened in the first session. I just remember being a lot of physical sensations and thinking that was unusual. And I came out and I said, I'll give it another go and see what happens. And the second time, I don't know what happened, but I just remember this emotional release came out. And I knew 100% it was grief. I could picture my mum and dad. And I knew, and it's not like I went in feeling upset or, I hadn't this grief. I'm quite open about it. I can talk about it all the time. I can articulate how I feel about it, but there was obviously something in my body that just was sitting there and would never have gotten out until I'd done this. And I just found that amazing that was there. I had no idea. And that's how it got released, was through the breath work. So yeah, it set me off on a little journey to kind of learn more and just learn about the functional side. And then I took, with Rewild, I did a trauma-informed somatic breath work. And that was amazing training, just again, personal development wise, even without the breath work piece. But yeah, just being able to kind of provide those spaces, I think, for people that actually they can just be present with the breath, the body, themselves. I don't think we get time, or we don't allow ourselves to do these times unless we're given that dedicated space, unless somebody's welcome you and say, yeah, come here for an hour. You're just going to be with yourself. So I think just gives people permission to sit with themselves and be present. And it's like the ultimate mindfulness, just to kind of sit with your breath, I think, as well. But it just shifts so. Every time I've done it, I've had a different physical experience with it. So yeah, it's been amazing.
What have you learned about holding joy and grief at the same time and finding that balance?
I've definitely learned to do it more, I think, this time around. I don't know if that was the kids as well. It was a different kind of grief with my mum. Obviously, I didn't have my own family at the time. So when my dad passed away, I was married with kids, so it's a different stage of life as well. So I had a different perspective after my dad passed, and I was able to look at it a little differently. I find that with grief, it just gives you a whole new perspective. And for me, it was about, I have to lean into what's good and the joy and the joyful moments. And there is, like, there's two sides to everything, I think. I mean, you learn so much through the hard times, the painful times. You learn, I listened to something the other day, and it was like, you know, if you want to learn, or if you want patience, you're going to have to wait for things. You know, if you want to be wise, you have to go through difficult things and learn things. And I was like, that is basically it. There's always going to be a good that comes out of bad if you really look for it. Now listen, I'm not saying that happens immediately either. I think you really have to allow yourself to process the grief and the sadness and the heaviness of it, because that's there for a good while. So this doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. It really is. So it's not to put pressure on people, say, no, find the good. There is no good at the beginning. There's just sadness, there's loss, there's heaviness, there's learning how to live with that and sit with that. And eventually you'll find a little joy creeping in, or you'll find a different way to look at it, a different way to honour it, accept it. Yeah, so it's really individual. But I think it really helps if you're given the space to do that, if you're given someone who's going to help you acknowledge it, witness it, teach you how to be kind to yourself around it, and give yourself the space. I think you can find the joy in the grief.
Krystle Phelan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and sharing your story with us. How do you mind yourself?
I mind myself through, I'm going to say, like, my self-talk, number one. I've had to really hone in on how I talk to myself, how I care for myself. Mindfulness, the self-compassion element of mindfulness. So for me, it's acknowledging whatever comes up. It's okay. It's okay to feel sad about this. It's okay, even sometimes, like I said, it's okay not to participate in some of the things maybe at Christmas that you would have done. It's okay to set a boundary for yourself. They're really practical things, not just I love going out for walks and nature, and I love going back to the breath and meditation. They're brilliant things as well. And I love time with my kids. For me, you realise the value of time, especially when you lose people. So just spending time with them, being present with the ones you really love, that all adds to my self-care. And sometimes it'll be different on different days. Sometimes it's just, a cup of coffee for myself or whatever, but it's making the intention. It's the intention behind it sometimes. So yeah, lots of different things sometimes, but yeah, that's mostly how I look after myself.
Thank you very much, Krystle.
Thank you, Krystle.
Thank you.
That is it for today's episode of Mind Yourself. If something in this conversation has resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because these are the conversations that matter. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, a quick rating or review really helps us to reach more people. So until next time, mind yourself.